Specifically for community radio, we are the local voices of your friends and neighbors around the corner. So when your funding gets cut, that means not being able to afford the rent. That means not upgrading technology, which could mean your generator in a public safety emergency. And if that goes down, then the community doesn't get access to emergency alerts. It also means when public radio is hit, and then also the National Weather Service and FEMA get hit, it's this ripple effect where the National Weather Service may choose no longer to renew their contract with your local community radio station or public radio station. So that goes away for your community. So you don't get the tornado warning or the flood warning. And then if the generator, which they couldn't replace, or rent doesn't get paid, that's one less way our friends and neighbors will lose access to that actual public safety alert.
Welcome to Shoresides, where we explore the coastal North Carolina region's past, present, and future to promote community resilience. On July 18th, the House of Representatives passed the Rescissions Act of 2025, which will cut $9 billion in funding that Congress had previously approved for foreign aid and public broadcasting. That means that millions of local radio stations, including those enjoyed by North Carolinians, will be forced to either pinch pennies or risk going under. One of the most affected stations in the country is WRVS, run by Elizabeth City State University, a historically black university located on the coast of North Carolina. The station is poised to lose 70% of its funding from this move from Congress. To illustrate how changes in Washington will affect everyday North Carolinians, we'll speak to Rima Dael, CEO of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, to learn more.
So many folks are familiar with NPR stations. Most of my membership is not affiliated at all with NPR. And we go from tiny one-person staff LPFMs, those are low power FM stations, to larger stations which may have 3, 5 staff members. But community radio primarily relies on volunteers to do the production work, content work, outreach to the community. So the DJs you hear and the hosts you hear on the air are primarily volunteers. And we also do have 100% volunteer-driven stations.
When Congress signed a bill to take back $9 billion in federal funding, it included a $1.1 billion cut to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This effectively shuts off all federal support for NPR, PBS, and their member stations. Dael notes that it will also affect community stations run by local volunteers. These cuts may seem like big abstract numbers, but Dael believes that they will have noticeable consequences for everyday Americans.
Community radio stations, along with the rest of public media, TV stations, and nonprofit radio in general, we provide 3 very important things. We're part of the national civic infrastructure for public safety. As unfortunately we've seen in Texas earlier this year with the California fires, earthquakes in Alaska, fires in Maui. When the internet, cable, and electricity goes down, AM and FM radio are the plan B of our civic infrastructure for public safety. That means emergency alerts from the National Weather Service, Amber Alerts even, and other such types of alerts.
Hurricane watch has been upgraded to a hurricane warning for the following county: Inland Pender, North Carolina, and Northern Horry, South Carolina.
The second piece of what public radio and specifically community radio does is we are a cultural anchor.
I don't know who broke the lock on the hen-house door.
If you had to guess, which one of these would you say is your favorite quilt? Do you have a favorite one?
Well, I ain't got no favorite quilt. They all, of course, I've got the new ones over there. I'll take care of them for the kids. I think more
for
of that
local storytelling,
Right.
local music, and companionship. And then third, local news and information. Those last two things are really important in the community radio space because not everyone has access to internet, cell phone, and TV in rural and tribal regions. And stories, music, and culture from rural communities and just any local community doesn't get the same play regionally and on national networks.
In addition to losing access to weather services and making it more difficult to pay rent and other maintenance costs, the production quality of broadcasts decrease as well, as stations cannot repair or replace aging equipment.
And on a micro version, it means you're using old equipment because you can't replace it. You know, microphones cost something. but I think even podcasters and those who listen to audio on their cell phone or their smart speaker, or or on an old-timey radio in their kitchen, they also understand infrastructure. It costs money to maintain equipment, and that's what gets lost. And you need that equipment to tell the stories and the news of your community.
In addition to the important practical losses that come with local radio losing funding, there is a cultural cost as well.
One of the great pieces of North Carolinian culture that I adore is the intersection of pop, Appalachian, and traditional folk music. That's unique to North Carolina, that you don't get in many other places. Folk dancing, contra dancing, is also a big deal in North Carolina. That's music, culture, and story that gets played on a local level in North Carolina that doesn't get necessarily played in Western Massachusetts, in my old hometown of Amherst, Massachusetts, or where I am currently in West Hartford, Connecticut. We talk about other stuff. We talk about lobster rolls in the summer, and sea shanty music, from Mystic. So it's that local flavor that gets lost. when funding gets lost.
That kind of loss may seem inconsequential, but for Dael, it's an important part of what keeps listeners grounded.
Now that's arts and culture. So you can say that that's a luxury, not an essential piece of our day-to-day living. Yet you and I also both know that audio is this great companion. It's what kept us all sane through COVID, right? And it's what keeps us sane now.
Dael believes that the move to cut funding is not only politically motivated, but fundamentally un-American.
In the adulting world, we know that we need to balance our checkbooks. So for the country to want to do that, it is in itself a positive thing. The difficulty with the cuts that are being made and have been made, in my opinion, is breaking down an American value of valuing public goods for our entire country. And what I mean by that, access to local parks, access to a free education, libraries, access to fact-based information and news that you don't have to pay for. The attempt and the current voting to defund public media goes against that American value of the public good, of free access to fact-based news and information. Defunding PBS and NPR, as the current administration has framed it, and what the DOJ hearing did earlier this year, didn't talk about that at all. What they did talk about was a culture war issue where they claimed NPR and PBS were left-leaning political propaganda machines, and they didn't want to use taxpayer dollars to do that. That is not the truth of the matter. NPR receives 1% of their entire budget from the federal government. PBS receives 15%. And why the discrepancy? TV costs more to produce than radio.
Dael thinks that public broadcasting is not a political tool so much as an educational one.
The money actually goes first to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which was founded by the Johnson administration and bipartisan Congress support in 1967 to keep the public airwaves for the public and primarily for education use. I'm a Gen Xer, so programs like Sesame Street, Electric Company, and Mr. Rogers were created in many ways to educate those of us at home watching. There are entire generations of kids who have grown up on the educational programming from PBS. And first and foremost, that is what the content that NPR and PBS create. Not to break news, but to provide context to the news that's happening around our country, and to further educate us on things like how the government works, why clean air and clean water is needed in our communities. Good music and stories pull us together as a country. And that's really what PBS and NPR and the public media space does, regardless if we are affiliated with NPR and PBS. Specifically for community radio, we are the local voices of your friends and neighbors around the corner. Maybe also from around the world, but primarily from around the corner.
Dael's recommendation for radio stations in danger is to tell anyone they can about their problems and ask for their support.
Talk to each other. Talk to local officials. On the public safety side, community radio stations and public radio station should receive money from local government because of their role in a public safety emergency to get the word out. Talk to arts funders. Talk to local businesses. And be honest about how dire it is. This isn't the allegory of the boy who cried wolf or Chicken Little with the sky is falling. No, the sky has fallen. The wolf is at the door. And again, local community radio stations are in it for their communities. Most of the community radio stations that are going to get hurt are in red states and in rural communities and on tribal lands and in BIPOC communities. So this will hurt the most vulnerable of our friends and neighbors. Communities that already don't have access to cable, phones, or internet on a day-to-day basis, let alone what happens in a public emergency.
For Dael, this fight is bigger than funding for radio stations. She believes that it's about defining what America's civic values should be.
This is a philosophical argument as well on what the role of government is and should be. Regardless of your political standing, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or all the various iterations of those political philosophies, many of us in public radio do believe that the government has a role in protecting its citizens. And public radio is one of the ways that this country protects our citizens. There's also many of us that believe the government should provide free education. Public radio, public media is another way that we do that in this country. So, for those two reasons, the work must continue on an advocacy level. But the work also must continue regardless of if the government funds it or not.
From Shoresides, this is Nicholas Merino. Learn more about Shoresides at shoresides.org. Thanks for listening.